Hello, everybody. Anthony Crane here with Pocket Coach. And let me start my 5-minute timer. Our experiment today is visualize flow. So visualizing flow. This is a very complex topic. We're going to keep it simple here today. We're going to talk more about value streams and how visualizing flow can help with value streams in the value stream experiment. And we're going to talk about how visualizing flow can help you with product acceleration in our product experiments. This is more about visualizing the flow of work for a new team, whether it's a business agility team or a development team, okay? So we wanna visualize the work we're all doing. So the problem here, we need to understand our status we need people to understand our status without them interrupting us, right? Status reports are a waste of time. They can just look at us and see what's going on, even better. And who wants to write a status report, right? Also, our own team needs to understand what's happening so that we can help each other more. And visualizing flow can truly help us do that. So hypothesis, if we create a big visible information radiator, that's what they call it, a BVIR. It's basically a big drawing with all the work on it physically on a wall or in some kind of a tool. If we create a BVIR that shows our work, we will be able to avoid status reporting. Look at our board, right? We'll be able to pair better. We'll be able to mob better because we can see what the work is now and look to helping each other more easily. We should be able to accelerate work because of all that. We also will see that there's certain work stalled out in a column and we can focus on it. We can see which columns we have too many things and why are we so slow in that one column of visualizing our work. And finally, we should be able to improve evaluate our improvement experiments. So every Agile team should be improving themselves. Well, we should visualize that as well. So all that will happen if we visualize work. The time frame for the experiment, a typical one here, 6 weeks, and pivot or persevere every 2 weeks, or about every sprint if you're doing 2-week sprints. Typical outcomes. We want to see higher quality work, and we want to see more work completed per period. We believe that that's what you're going to get out of this because of the pairing and because of the visualization. Now, skill growth criteria. In other words, what do you got to do? To get this one off the ground, you need to create a BVIR, and we ask that you start with one of our shoe BVIRs. You don't have to, right? If you have a coach already who has a favorite BVIR, start with theirs. We have one for software teams and one for business agility teams that we like to start with. After they master that, then they can start to tweak it and grow it. And again, this is different than a value stream. This is different than a product flow. We'll cover those in different videos. You've used the BVIR for a few sprints and are now making improvements to it. So that's what we're looking for. So if we go to some assets now, I have 2.5 minutes left. So I want to show you a couple things in my 5 minute. I might need a second 5, but I'll try to, it's going to be pretty close. So first off, we're going to talk about wall styles. So when you create a BVIR, the original simplest BVIR had 2 columns, to do and done. And you can still do that. Here's my to do, here's my done, and you're done, right? Nice, visualized. But most people quickly moved to a 3-column wall, which was to do, stuff we haven't started, doing, and done. And the reason that they added doing instead of just to do and done is they wanted to see how much work do we have in progress. We call that WIP. And so with WIP, it's like if the more WIP you have, the more delay there is because there's things waiting and there's all this WIP and each of these items is taking time. And so it causes delay. If you only have one thing, then the next thing on the list only has to wait for that one thing to get done. So counterintuitively, if we reduce the work in progress, we actually increase flow. Lots of cool experiments around that. We probably will do a video on that singular topic in a later video. So moving on from there, we see walls where this is a great development wall, refine, design, code, test, deploy, done, right? Those are some of the ones. And you can even put what are called policies. The policies are, what does it take to get out of this column? And now that means you have to put less tasks on your wall. You can just say, hey, did we finish the items in the policy? Yeah, then we can move on. No, then we're not done yet. So you're going to encode policies in your walls. There's some tools like Jira Cloud and Jira Prem that do not allow you to put the policies right on the board. Frustrates the heck out of me. Most of the other tools, you can actually mouse over and see your policy pop up. I've submitted on that one and I voted on it as well. If you want to, they say things like, who needs that? And I'm like, this is Kanban 101, baby. All right. And then this is the one that we used to use for tasks, but now is really for more business agility. New, accepted, started by, next, recently, done, and done. So these are the business agility columns we tend to use. So that's almost my entire 5-minute time box. That's good enough for this asset here. For the second 5 minutes, what I want to do is I'm going to actually show you a little more about those 2 boards that you just saw, like what our policies are for those columns. And I also want to show you just a trip down nostalgia lane of some of the boards that we've seen in the past. So if you come back, if you stick around for the next 5 minutes, you'll get some policy information on these 2 boards and a couple of photos. Okay, I'm going to reset this timer. Okay, welcome to the second 5 minute. Oop, I had it start. Okay, welcome to the second 5 minutes. So first off, these are our team Kanban policies. And you can see here, we have a business agility Kanban, SHU. If you're not sure what Chuhari is, we have another video for that. Please go watch that. We have a business agility Kanban board for our SHU. We have a development Kanban board for SHU. And then we also have the custom value stream Kanban boards. That's the stuff that's either product specific or value stream specific. And those have a whole different set of rules. But in the meantime, let's talk about these. So for business agility, we have new, accepted a sprint, started by next, recently done, and done. So if you notice, then we have 4 columns for doing. So notice it's the same as a 3-column board. To do is new. Doing is 4 things, and done is done. So one of the things that you want to do in designing a board is you want the least amount of columns that handles the most amount of risk. So what risks were we handling by having a 6-column board? That's the question you can legitimately ask us. So new is anything that hits our sprint late, we put that in new. And we do that so that we can reject it. We can accept it into the backlog, but not to the sprint. We could accept it into the sprint if we swap something out. Or finally, we can accept it as a sprint and think we can squeeze it in. And we can monitor all those behaviors. But if you don't have a new column, what was happening was people just put sticky notes right into our board. And nobody realized that team members were adding work. And that's not acceptable. We all have to agree as a team whether this work should have been added or not. So here, policy-wise, work added after the sprint starts, right? Triage, work type. What kind of type is this? A feature? Is this an epic? Is this just a story? Is this a task? And at the end of the stand-up meeting, so we have a stand-up meeting every day or once on a period if you're a more part-time team. And notice that we do not cross this line outside of a stand-up. So if you put something in new, it's stuck in new until the next stand-up meeting. By the way, this black line over here, same thing. We do not cross this black line into done. We'll talk more about that. So those 2 black lines represent outside of the stand-up meeting, you're locked, okay? You can't cross those. Accepted a sprint. So now we've talked about it and we've said, hey, this is actually a good thing to work on. If you're in a Kanban team, by the way, we've changed new to backlog. If you're not on a Kanban team, then this is new to the, and it could be backlog in a separate pile or into the sprint. So if you're doing Scrum. So work accepted into the sprint, but not yet begun, or work accepted to work on if you're a Kanban team. Your size is understood or don't pull from new, right? We got to understand size, and it's well formed, right? So you got to make sure that we understand this story to accept it. Some people prefer to do the well-formed refinement portion inside of accepted a sprint. That's fine too. The one thing that's true is when it gets into started, it has to be well formed. Started, it's just something that we're working on. And if we're going to limit WIP in any one column, this is the column we want to limit WIP on. By next, this is the most exciting column on this board for me. By next says, I promise to get this done by our next stand-up meeting. It's a focus column. It's an accelerator for sure. When we put work in by next, people are like, when the next morning, let's say the stand-up's at 10, they see this, they're like, oh my gosh, I have to get something. I promise I'd get that done. It's just yourself. It's your own commitment, but it really does accelerate value. Also, if you have nothing in by next, you're like, maybe I'm not decomposing my work well enough. Like I should be able to get something done every day. And so the by next column also helps us to right size our work in order to visualize flow nicely. We don't worry about it on an individual level. As long as a team is closing stuff every day, hey, that's a good thing, right? Recently done, we also call the confirmation and celebration column. So here's a problem. Without the recently done column, the risk here was, so okay, risk. This was the risk that people add stuff that we don't know of. This is the risk that the stuff isn't well understood. This is the risk of too much work in progress. This one is the risk of low commitment, right? How do we get more, committing to more, getting more flow? Recently done is the risk that we didn't do a good job. And check this out, without the recently done, people put stuff directly in done. And then we couldn't tell what was newly added there and maybe wasn't done well enough versus stuff that we already talked about and we all agree is well done. So the recently done is almost like a test column, if you will. So in here, the work we think is done. So I put my work in here. If it's not really done, we might move that back to by next or started, depending on how much more work there is to be done. If it's really done, then we celebrate and move to done. And at the end of the stand-up, this is also empty. So look, both the new and recently done columns are completely empty after a stand-up meeting. So understand that what happens here is I say, hey, I finished this thing. And someone goes, Anthony, are you sure you finished it? Did you remember to email that one person? I'm like, oh, I forgot that part. I can do that by tomorrow. So go ahead and move it back to by next, right? So my team helps me do a better job. And finally, done is the work completed in this sprint. This is just one sprint board. If you're doing it for Kanban, then most tools will clean up that done column on a cadence of some kind. But you don't want this to be overfull with every single thing. We don't talk about this. So we say the done column is like Vegas. What's in the done column, we don't talk about. It's like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And finally, we have some items that we label review, demo, or skip as well. So we use the labels a lot. If you label something review, it means that during the sprint review, you're going to talk about it for 30 seconds. If you label it demo, it means that you're going to actually do a demonstration of product. And if you put skip, it means, yeah, this one was good for us, but probably not that exciting for our stakeholders. I know some people believe you should demo every single story. I believe SAFE even says that, or at least it did in 4.1. Sorry, 5.1, the current version as of the recording of this video. But skip means we just don't think it's exciting enough for our stakeholders, even though it was important for us to track that work. All right, that's my second 5-minute time box. As you can see, I only covered the business agility Kanban. So in the final 5 minutes, making this a 15-minute video, I will talk about the development Kanban board. So if you're interested in the development Kanban board, and I'm going to show you some pictures of some boards of time passed. So, and that should be a very quick thing. Okay, so let's start that last 5-minute timer, hopefully. So here's the development team Kanban board, and it should look a lot more like a waterfall lifecycle. Here's your new or backlog, and I guess I could do the same thing up here, put new/backlog for Kanban teams versus regular teams. I'm sorry, versus Scrum teams. Regular, that's not right. Same thing with new, as we saw above. Refine, this is where we actually refine our understanding of this product work we're about to do. Develop, this is where we develop solutions to that work, and you can see the different policies there. Test is how we validate that the work was done well. Notice that there is unit test happening here, whereas we have a third-party test or peer test or something, someone else other than the person who did it. Deploy is moving the solution into production dark. Not everyone has that capability. So if you don't have that capacity, you would delete this column. You would delete the deploy column. So if you're not going to prod every sprint, right, you might want to go to a prod-like environment. So you have to come up with a definition of what deploy is. And we put that in each story. If you want to know more about the definition of done, you can see our videos on definition of done or on story writing and epic writing, etc. Release is now it's in production. So if you always go straight to production and you don't do dark, you would get rid of deploy, you still have release. If your stories don't go to production individually, you might say, you know what, our stories end in test, and then we move them to done, and they sit there until some other release function pulls them all out. And so you might not visualize that on this board. If you're doing a sprint board, if you're doing a Kanban board, you might leave it in some interim column until it does in fact get, so you would leave it in the release column, ready for release, and it just sits there until it is released, and then we finally clear that column. So that's it. That's how we might do it for development versus business agility. Both of these boards are accelerators, and there you have it. We do have the value stream specific one. So here's one for a team. So one of my products is teams. Whenever you do one of these, so this is like a value stream one, which I said we'd discuss in another video. But if you look at this, you need to know what your flow item is. And again, you watch our value stream videos, you'll see more about this, but you want to know what your flow item is. In this case, the flow item is a team trying to become agile. And so funnel, this is a team that wants to be coached. Prioritize, we have too many teams and not enough coaches. So how do we decide which team to pull? Launch, this is when we actually go to that team and do a launch workshop with them, which is a 5-day event. Accelerate, this is now 3 sprints worth of coaching after the 5-day event to get them to more of a mature level before we go into spot coaching. Graduation, this is when, okay, they've gotten through those 3 sprints, and we kind of just introduce them to what happens next. They're not abandoned, but they don't have the high touch experience anymore. And then aftercare, this is the final state for a team, and that's when they can do one-off requests and track their own improvement items using their VDA backlog. That's another experiment, the Value Delivery Acceleration team. So if you want to know what VDA is, stands for Value Delivery Acceleration, and by all means, please watch our VDA or Value Delivery Acceleration video, which we have not yet produced, coming soon. And then finally, the product aftercare, report aftercare as product using KPIs. So this here is we kind of track using KPIs how well that team is doing. Okay. All right. So the last thing I want to show you, and we'll call it quits for today's video, is just a little trip down memory lane here. So COVID has made this largely a, why is that not open? There we go. COVID has made it largely a remote world, but it didn't always be. This is one of our first electronic boards that we ever created. And you can see here, we had our stories going through those engineering-like phases: refine, design, code, test, deploy. And we had our tasks moving through what are now the business agility columns. So this story had these tasks, and these tasks would walk along, and you would know that this task belonged to that story. That was rational team concert. Very rarely do I see people using that tool as much now. Here is, we created this as a plotter, and you could print it on these giant plotters. And so people could print a wall and hang it in a room, and they would have an instant wall. Again, you can see refine, design, deploy, test, deploy, very similar. And then new, not started, started by next, recently done, those new business agility columns. Here's one where they did it using blue painter's tape. Here's one where they use string in company colors. The company colors are green and red. And you can see here that they use green and red. But again, you can see it's all the same column. So this has been around for a long time. Here's us doing a stand-up meeting with, again, a similar type of board. Here's someone setting it up using the frame of the window in the conference room and the final product there. And this one is really interesting. This was a company that had a clean desk policy, so you couldn't have walls. So this is a magnetic board, and these are magnets, these little things so you get a dry erase, so you don't have to throw any posts away. Really thought that was cool. They put their team on here, and here's the wild part. Do you see this hollow here in the red? You can actually slide all the boards into the hollow and lock it. And so that's how we got around the clean desk policy. This board also slid towards towards me, if you will, towards you as a viewer, slide that way. And they could have multiple teams then in a single space. So when it was your time, you would come to this area and you would unlock it with a combination lock, and you would slide out your team's boards and you would work, and then you slide them back in for another team to come and slide theirs out. So really wild solution. It cost them $150,000 to set up not just this, but the entire space with tables and projectors and all that. There's a whole bunch more pictures on this one, but I just showed you what I thought was the coolest picture. There's like 8 pictures here. So there you go. People used to take this very seriously in a physical world, but even in an electronic world, as you saw, we can do this sort of thing in Jira, in Microsoft ADO, in Rational Team Concert, or whatever tool version 1 that you have. We can make it work. Okay, so my name is Anthony Crane. I hope you enjoyed this 15-minute video on the visualize work experiment. And apparently I can't look for the stop button and say the name of the experiment at the same time, but there you have it. Visualize work. Thank you very much. I'm Anthony Crane with Pocket Coach.